cross-promoted on Twitter. And we're live. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Apex Communications Network live streams. I am your host, John Almasy, and as always, I hope you are doing well, taking care of yourself both physically and mentally throughout this entire process. And today we're going to be getting a little bit deep. I know that we talked the last couple of times. It was ironic, the conversations on hashtag Let's Talk About Something Else with Kathy Yaros. Some of the other things that we've been doing have also kind of reached a similar level of intricacy. But tonight is going to be a little bit more on the personal side of that note. And also kind of talking about things surrounding faith, perspective, and kindness with a woman that has been a rock of mine for as long as I can remember. So for everybody that's listening, I would like to welcome my aunt, Miss Janet Wilks, to the live stream.
Hey, everybody.
So in case people do comment and stuff like that, over on your right-hand side, you can see there's a button that says comments. If anybody says anything on the streams, it should pop up in there.
Okay, I see it says live. Should I do from private chat to live comments? Oh, I can see now. All right. You can teach an old dog new tricks, Yanko. Yeah. It's okay if I call you Yanko on this, right?
Yeah, that's fine. John D says the same thing. So for those of you that don't know, if you're listening right now, there's a thing in Slovak culture where if you're little, they add a KO onto the end of your name, and it basically means mini version of whoever you are. So Yanko, for everybody that's listening, means Little John. And then when I started getting older and I went to college and everything else like that, I started having people call me Jan. And I can actually tell how long somebody has known me or my family based on what they call me. So it's been an interesting gauge to see how long someone has actually known us, if they call me Jan or they call me Yanko.
Yeah. See, Yanko just seems so much more, I don't know. You've always been part of my heart. So, you'll always be Yanko to me.
Right. Oh, yeah. I feel it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like what did great grandma always called Dad Ricky.
Yeah.
Right. Until, she was.
Well, it seems so much more endearing than Jan. Jan just seems like, I don't know. I guess because I've known you. Well, I've known you since you were like,
before I was here.
Yeah, that Yanko is more of a, I don't know, an endearing.
It is, yeah, and it's a family thing. Like it's something that my family is allowed to call me, and because of the fact that it is endearing, it makes you feel safe, like knowing that there's people around you that are calling you that. So I'm going to share this to a couple of different places, and then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes here.
Okay.
But how's your week been so far? Decent.
It's been good. I have to tell you, when I was checking out Facebook, because every once in a while I just go in. I try to limit my use because I can get on there and then really just get sidetracked. But I go out and look for baby pictures, with Becca and Matt and Therese and the little one, and pictures of Alicia's little one. But then as I was scrolling through, I was like, oh yeah, Yanko's got stuff posted on here. And I started reading, and then I realized you were talking about me. It actually made me cry.
Oh,
I was like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah. Would you just read the description for the show, or?
Yeah, I read the description for the show, and I thought, because it's always been a lifelong struggle for me that I think other people see me a lot stronger than I see myself.
Mm-hmm. I feel that.
So yeah, I've gotten a lot better at that, but it's always been kind of a, the thing.
Yeah. Can you do me a favor actually and just turn the volume down on your end just a little bit?
Okay, that might require that I get Malia here to do that.
It's just like I'm hearing a lot of my voice in the background just as an echo. So if you're listening right now, and go ahead and comment. Hey Kathy, so since you're listening right now, can you hear that echo on your guys' end, or is that just something in my headphones? We'll see what she says. Ooh, also I need to fix my cropping on one of my logos. She just sent me a screenshot.
She said,
it says empathetic mass communication is our tagline, right? But it says pathetic mass communication. This is not good.
Okay, so let me see. Share screen, mute. I don't want to mute.
No, you're gonna have to go into like, look, you have a PC. Oh man, she disappeared. Okay. Well, for everybody that's out there right now, I'm going to text her and see what happened there. I'm sure that she accidentally pressed a button. I'm going to text my cousin, Malia, who is the technological expert in the house because she's 12, and see if she has any headphones that Aunt Janet can borrow. And I say that endearingly, like Malia is legitimately technologically solid.
You good, Mom?
All right.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah, let me see if I can hear myself. Nope, I don't hear any of my echo anymore.
Okay. All right.
Perfect. That'll work.
Malia had to show me how to do it.
It's all good. That's why we have her around.
I know. You know me, it takes a community or
Yes,
village or,
Yeah, definitely a village. All right, so let me pull up this thing and then we're good to go. First, so everybody that's tuning in, Kathy says that that's definitely way better. So for everybody that's tuning in, like I said, this is my Aunt Janet Wilks. We'll just kind of dive into a little bit of her backstory as a human, and then we'll kind of get to the to some of the pivotal moments that I want to discuss tonight that it seems like everybody's been looking forward to. So thank you guys all for popping in. Tracy Pettit, Amanda, Linda Whitaker, thank you, Kathy, as always. Appreciate your support. Jennifer, welcome, and we'll just go into it. So, Aunt Janet, why don't you go ahead and just explain to everybody, where you were born and raised, and I guess part of what makes our relationship what it is from your perspective.
From my perspective, I was born in Canton. Canton's my hometown. But after college, I got married and moved to was Virginia, then Pensacola, Florida, and anyway, we ended up in Columbus, Ohio. I'm presently divorced and been in Columbus for 40 years almost. But my brother Rick, who's just a year younger than me, has his kids, Yanko being the oldest, has kids the same age as my grandson, or close to the age of my grandson, Taylor. And Taylor's actually been kind of like more of a brother to Yanko and Sam and Zuki.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. And my little granddaughter, Malia, is the same. So Yanko's mom and I at Weva make goat milk soap together and lotion bars and all that kind of stuff. We've done all the craft shows and all of that. So I've spent quite a bit of time at their house. So it was kind of natural that we all hung out together, and we're like more like one family unit. Because when I went through the divorce, Rick was Yanko's dad sells medical supplies, and he used to come through Columbus all the time. And it was funny because he'd always spend the night at the house, and the kids and I were, we'd eat together and everything. And then all of a sudden one day he's like, "Oh, I think I'm going home." And it's like, "Yeah, but you always stay, Uncle Rick. What's the deal?" Well, then it was like, all we kept hearing was Eva. And it's like, yeah, who is this Eva?
That's funny.
Yeah. So we finally figured it out, and the rest is history.
Yeah, he always talks about how like grandma would just bug him over and over and over and over again to finally take her out on a date, and then being sassy and saying, "Okay, I'll take her out on a date, but we'll go jet skiing so I don't have to talk to her."
Well, because he had said,
downhill.
I mean, she's from Slovakia, and when they would come to visit, they would always coax my brother Rick to take these folks that came to visit from Slovakia, out to see the town. And he said 99% of the time they couldn't speak English, and it just was awkward for him. But then all of a sudden he met Eva, and Lord have mercy. The rest was history.
Yep,
So,
there we are.
Yeah.
She's definitely a character, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, they both are. Really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who's the bigger character, your mom or your dad.
Yeah, and then you get Mizuki and Sam that are all like very distinct mixtures of both of their personality types, and it gets even weirder.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's what, like, having all of us in the same room at the same time talking about that one family unit and everything is just like that's why I've always held like Thanksgivings and everything else like that so close, is just because you get we're not even like an extended family, like you said.
Yeah.
You get everybody together in one room. We're just one giant family unit.
Yeah.
And it's always felt like that. It's always felt that way for me. Even when, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that was going on. So I structured this title in a way that it's going to kind of naturally guide us through a storyline. Right?
Okay.
And so I started with it's all about faith. Right?
Absolutely.
And then I moved into the power of perspective, and then I ended it with choosing to be kind, because I think inside of my head, my battle with everything that I went through in high school that caused me to leave faith, and then the journey back to it, is what kind of started all of this. And then choosing to have the good perspective, looking back on that journey, gave me the ability to be kind, to choose to be kind.
Mm-hmm.
But without it happening in that order, the finally getting to that point at the very end of the spectrum, like the choosing to be kind and actually having the capability to be kind, that those aren't necessarily kind to you, I wouldn't have that ability if the faith issue hadn't happened and the perspective piece hadn't happened. So
yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of parallels with our lives that you don't realize.
Yeah. Well, and we'll open some of those doors tonight, but I'll tell you, everybody that's listening right now, the whole reason why this is happening is right now is because we had a phone call not too long ago, and she called me and was asking about COVID. We were talking about coronavirus and like this person saying this and this person saying this, and she was like, I knew if there was one person that would be nerding out over all of this and trying to figure it out, it'd be you. And I want your opinion on some of this stuff. So we had a conversation. Inevitably, like our conversations always go, it started with coronavirus, and then it went into some existential crisis, and then we started talking about life, love, the pursuit of happiness, everything under the sun. And then 45 minutes later, I realized it had been 45 minutes, and it was like time to go to bed. And I towards the end of that phone call, I was like, you know what? I was like, I wish that people could hear our conversations. Right. And just to understand that bond that you can have with somebody, and to be able to be transparent and be just completely let loose, and be able to have that non-judgmental feedback and constructive criticism and whatever else, be able to have that and to push that out and showcase it to people was something that I thought was going to be super important. And here we are. So we'll start with the faith journey. So for me, where I really wanted to start this was, like freshman year of high school, right? This is where it all kind of started to hit the fan for me. So freshman year of high school, I had just gotten done being homeschooled for the first 13 years of my life, which was amazing. Set me up awesome. Academically, maybe not so much socially, but like really gave me a solid foundation to lean on as far as faith, as far as a value system, as far as a work ethic, that I didn't realize until way later. Right. But all of those things, I wanted to rebel against all of them as soon as I had the ability to, because I had been inside of that bubble for so long. As soon as I had the opportunity to get out from under that bubble, I was like, all right, I know exactly what I need to keep in check in order to get away with what I need to get away with. Or I guess not need to get away with, but what I want to get away with. Right. I knew if I kept good grades, if I was involved in sports, if I was present at like these different family functions, if I constantly seemed like I was pushing myself, that I would be able to get away with a lot of stuff. I went through that awkward phase where, you know, I had my hair down to my shoulders and was stealing Zuki's straightener and painting my nails and stuff. But that was like just because I was trying to find out who I was, right? Trying to figure out who is Jan. And inevitably, the only group that I could really attach to at that point were outcasts, or at least who I perceived to be outcasts, right? Started leading me down a path that I, got into drinking at a really early age, would steal my dad's liquor bottles from downstairs and then refill them with a little bit of caramel and a little bit of water so that it matched the color of the whiskey. And me and him have had conversations about that, joking about it nowadays. And that kind of opened up more doors and more doors to the point where I remember there was like 2 moments that really kind of defined this downhill path for me. And the first one was getting pulled over on 62 at 2:00 in the morning with 9 people in an F-150. Like, definitely could have gotten an OVI that night if the cop would have decided to breathalyze me. Definitely had substances in the vehicle that could have sent me to juvie for a long time and potentially been charged as an adult, because at that time I was close enough to 17 that in retrospect, looking back at it, I could have definitely been charged as an adult. Kathy said, "Oh, that had to have been a fun phone call." That was a horrible phone call, Kathy. And this is just a low point, right? I remember Dad coming to pick me up and not saying a word the entire drive home, and then waking up the next morning to one of my mom's famous letters, sitting on the dining room table, just outlining all of the different ways that I was a jackass, and that I was a disappointment, all the different ways that I had failed the name of the family. And I sent me even more of a spiral at that point, because I was like, okay, I've been trying to keep all of this stuff in line. This is the path that my life is on at this point. I'm nothing but a disappointment, right? And that's where all of the really dark, abysmal thoughts started to creep in, right? And so that was right around 16 years old that I started having like suicidal ideation. But nobody ever really knew about it, right? Because I was so good at trying to keep the front up that a lot of that internal stuff I just kept compressed. Then the second defining moment for me was the positive one, and that was a phone call with you in my truck where I was like, I need to tell my dad about this. I don't think he knows. I think that he's suspicious about it, but I need to admit it to somebody. I trust you. Can you give me advice on what I need to do about it? And I remember that phone call it's vivid, because it was like one of the first times that I'd ever said it out loud, like admitted the fault in the path that I was on. And it was right around that same time that I also started making my way back to the church, because I had completely left. I had like mentally checked out at 16. I was just like, this is BS. I don't believe in any of this. God, I don't even know if God's real. There is this weird, like maybe a natural law of good and evil, but nothing else makes sense. So I'm just going to kind of do my thing. But that phone call really kind of transitioned a whole bunch of different things in my life. It kind of started bringing me back to the faith. It gave me the confidence to talk to my dad about it, which was also an extremely hard conversation, kind of admitting the fact that I was, stealing Oxycontin out of the medicine cabinet and all that kind of stuff. But I've been forever grateful for the courage that I received during that phone call to do it, because I 110% believe that I would not be on this live stream having this conversation if I wouldn't have grown the nuts because of that phone call to talk to my parents about it and lay it all out on the table. Because ever since that day, I haven't been able to shut up about all of the flaws that I have in my life. And that's probably the biggest thing. And that'll transition us into the perspective piece. But that is the biggest thing that I learned from not just listening to you, but watching you, right? Because it's not always about the words that people say. It's about how they act and how they treat other people. And that's one thing that I've always had a massive amount of respect for you on, is that you don't just talk shit.
Well, I have to tell you, Yanko, because for the longest time early on, I kept thinking, because there are a lot of things, and someday we'll talk about, some of the past, but I think part of the reason why I'm so willing to, or so understanding of the journey, is because my early life was a train wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't know a lot about a lot of the little ins and outs of it, but it was. And it was a struggle, and I had to work really hard at it. But when I hear like your story, it's like I realize that we all pick up a certain sense of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if we kind of feel lost, I think sometimes you make an error in judgment, and then the rest of it is like, oh, what the heck? I've made this one, so what's one more? And you don't really feel supported. But I got to tell you, that day, and I remember clearly, and I know you remember it as a phone call,
Mm-hmm.
but I called and talked to you on the phone, but
Mm-hmm.
somehow we ended up going up to Lifeway bookstore because I wanted to get a book, and you drove me up there because the weather was bad.
Yep.
And when you told me that in the truck, I had tons of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, it was like, oh my gosh, what do I do to help him? But the other emotion was, oh my gosh, he chose to tell me.
Right.
I knew it was the first time that you had let it out. And
Mm-hmm.
I really felt the presence of God, just like, it's like, and I caught myself just saying, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this other than listen
Yeah.
and pray.
Yep.
Because I knew you hadn't told your mom and dad. And I was like, at first, then I kind of felt like guilt. It was like, oh, he's telling me. But I knew that it was your job to tell your parents. It wasn't mine.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just prayed in the meantime that I was making the right decision about that, because I just feel like there's been so many times in my own life where someone on the outside looking in sees something that I've done, and they want to be critical about it, but it's like, you haven't lived my life, you don't know. You don't know the thought. And I used to tell people all the time, it's hard for me to take criticism from somebody. Now, I could take criticism from you because I know you love me. You always have my best interest in mind.
Right.
But sometimes when people criticize you, it's like, you don't know, I'm my own biggest critic.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Amen.
So, but yeah, I mean, I had every emotion under the sun going on, and it was like, oh my gosh, I know it. I knew what it took for you to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what it took for you to be able to, and I was so honored.
Mm-hmm. And that's
Because
the biggest thing that like really gave me the even faintest like ability to kind of push and talk about it in public after that, right? Because I was like,
yeah,
that reaction to that was just okay. I think that at that time I was starting to get my shit together finally, right? I was
yeah,
like in nursing school. I had my own truck, I had my own apartment, I was working 2 jobs in the military, really trying to make things happen, because in the back of my mind I knew that like if I didn't push myself and make it happen, that it was going to be tough to try to send both Suki and Sam to school. Like
right,
that's a thing. And so I was like, okay, if I join the military and I put myself through, I might be in a little bit of debt, but I know that both of my siblings are going to be able to go to school. And
yeah,
so that was in the back of my head, and admitting that big of a blot on a past, right? I had done everything that I could to get rid of it. Everything that I could possibly do in my life, I had structured like, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be upstanding. I'm going to try to hold myself to a certain set of standards. I'm going to try to push myself. I'm going to try to empower other people, and just pretend that that part of me doesn't exist anymore.
yeah,
Because that is a Jan that I don't know.
yeah,
Right. The thing is that Jan definitely still exists, and he's very real.
yeah,
And that day I realized that it was better for me to talk about it than it was to pretend that it didn't exist, because of 2 things. One, because there's a crap ton of other people that have gone through the exact same thing that wish that they
exactly.
could hear about somebody else that went through the exact same thing. And then the second part is that the longer that you let that type of sickness hold you down in the last, whatever part of your life you're from, whether it's domestic violence or it's drug abuse or it's mental health issues, whatever it is, the longer that you let that pin you down, the less time you have to be on the mission that you were actually intended to be on.
Right.
And so it's that peace, like that darkness, and if anybody's listening to this right now and they're dealing with that type of place, or they're trying to come out of that type of place, you're good. Like the fact that you're watching this right now means that you're interested in trying to make it out of there, which means you're beating it.
Yeah.
So understand that the fact that you're with us right now, or you're watching this after the live stream is over, means that you care enough, or you have people that care enough about you, that you're going to beat it. And so if you need to reach out and talk about it, then reach out and talk about it. And
Yeah. Well, and you know, for anyone who gets to listen to something like that, I mean, that's, to me, those kind of moments in my life, if I can help someone else by just listening, because I don't think I gave you any advice other than you need to tell your parents at some point in time. I don't think it was just Aunt Janet and Yanko, just like it always was.
Yep.
And to me, those are the kind of moments that, you know, if I can have that kind of effect on someone's life, that's, to me, is a legacy. And that, to me, is a gift that you know, that God has given me.
Yeah.
So
And there's one more piece of that I want to throw in. And I don't think it's a part that you even know. I think this is actually, I've been kind of saving it for a while, and now is probably the best time more than ever to talk about it. But there's actually a point where Grandpa knew about it before anybody else did. Right? We were like, I was leaving a wrestling match type of thing. Or not leaving a wrestling match, it was practice, right? And I had gotten into some issues there, and he was like walking around and he saw some stuff in my wrestling bag, right? And I like hurry up and zipped it up type of thing. And we had, you know, he was famous for having these conversations with the grandkids in that little truck, his stick shift, that he would always come and pick us up in and stuff like that. And he would kind of talking about, just like, listen, I know, he was like, I know where that leads people. And he was like, you are the type of person that is going to change a lot of things for a lot of people if you put your mind to it. He was like, I can tell. And he was like, I'm not going to let you throw your life away like that. So he was like, I'll make you a deal. And he was like, I'm going to take this with me to the grave if you make me a promise and say that you're going to be different than everybody else, that you're going to try to push yourself and you're going to try to help as many people as you possibly can. And so I was, like 15, 16 years old at the time. I'm like, yeah, sure, Grandpa, that's, that works.
No, but I got to tell you, as a sidetrack, and I know this is a part of your conversation, you don't know how insanely jealous I am that you had those kind of conversations with my dad.
Really?
We never,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all through all the struggles that I went through, he never, ever said a word to me about anything. Never any words of advice. Although, you know what, he had his own personal struggles, and maybe he didn't know how to do that with us kids or me.
Right.
But I am glad that he had those conversations with you guys.
Well, and like the feeling that I always got is that it was almost like he was trying to give back to us because he knew how important it was. Like he knew what type of impact it was going to have if he gave back to us. Like he had missed out on being able to do that with you guys.
Right.
And so I mean, that's why I've got his dog tags tattooed on my chest. Like I go visit him at the, graveyard all the time. It's just if there is a person between just anybody in our family, like I always tell people, if I could be half of the man that my dad and my grandpa are, I'll be lucky. And they're like, it's such a blessing to be able to come from a family like that. The longer that I've been around, I've only been on the planet 25 years, but the more people I've interacted with and the more I've traveled and, done stuff with the military and done outreach and whatever else, it's just definitely won the parent lottery and the family lottery. But so with the faith, right? Being able to talk about it was the first step. Being able to get it out there was the first step. Now that kind of triggered a whole bunch of different things for me on the faith side of the house, because I started to struggle with, okay, if this is like where I'm supposed to be, then does that mean that I need to hold myself to a higher standard? What is that standard? Is what I started asking myself. Like if I need to try to compare myself or try to hold myself to something and be different or whatever else, what does that even mean? Um, and so I started looking at like Judaism, Islam, Catholicism, Christianity, all this other kind of stuff. And what I really ended up coming back to is, and me and you have had plenty of conversations about this, is my, for the longest time, I was making my faith, I was basing my faith on off of other people's faiths. I was like, my version of Catholicism or Christianity is based off of the people that I see at church or how they interact. And the more I started looking at it, the more I realized that that is not my faith. My faith is not the front pew people. My faith is not the people at the back. You know, my faith is mine. I compare it to political stuff right now, right? I may be more on the conservative side, but do I agree with everything that right-wing conservatives agree with? No. Does that mean that I'm like on the far left? No. But, and because I'm Catholic, does that mean that I agree with everything that the Catholic Church stands for? No. But that's where faith comes in for me. And that was a huge realization for me across all aspects of my life, that I did not need to understand everything that was happening and why it was happening. I just needed to have faith that at some point I would understand why it happened. And that's where I kind of want to just open up the floor to you, is just that concept, is that you may not understand why it's happening, but having faith as a grounding center for being able to process it. And then that is going to lead us into the power perspective. So,
yeah. And I think, you know, for myself, I can remember, just really, I guess, I don't want to, condemns kind of a strong word. So I didn't, not necessarily that, but it just, you know, you saw all these other people at church and they always seemed to do the right thing. You know, I always just kind of felt like they were holy and I wasn't, you know? And then I can remember there was one particular Sunday at church and I was home, Sacred Heart, when it was still open. And I don't even remember who the priest was, but he gave one of those sermons that really just kind of touched your heart. And I don't know how long the sermon was, because I was just really caught up in listening to the conversation and the ideas that were going on in my head. And when we walked out of church, people were like, "Oh my gosh, can you believe Father talked for half an hour?" And it's like, yeah, but it meant a lot. So what I've kind of discovered over the years is that it's kind of like a relationship with a significant other or family member. I mean, you either devote the time to develop. It's really, you know, my faith is more intimate. It's personal, rather than, you know, being like Joe or Sam or Mary Sue or whoever. It's like I don't follow kind of that mold, like you said, right wing or left wing. No, it's you know, it's Janet and God, kind of thing. I mean, that doesn't mean that I make it up. I make up the rules. But, you know, there's been certain times in my life where things have happened where I really felt like God was personally talking to me. I mean, just like you and I are talking right now.
Yep.
Just as clear as a bell. And there is absolutely no doubt, and I've shared that one experience right before Reagan died that occurred, that there is no doubt in my mind that God was talking to me. And so I think as you develop that relationship, that's, you know, you get this different perspective of what faith really is.
Yeah. And the biggest thing for me is just like you said, it's a cross between I don't make up the rules and this relationship is my relationship and mine alone. Right.
Right. I'm not Catholic because my parents were Catholic. I'm Catholic because I want to be Catholic, you know, and I feel like I've developed this relationship with God. And, you know, sometimes it's prayer struggle. Yeah. But I mean, it's just like any other relationship, like between you and I, you either make an investment in it or you don't. And if you don't make an investment in a relationship, you're just not going to have that kind of relationship.
The difference between a relationship, earthly, and then a relationship between you and your spiritual being, like you and God, is that God will always invest back.
Absolutely.
Unlike a relationship down here where you may get sucked into a all give, no return type of situation from the emotional perspective. If you emotionally invest in trying to develop that relationship, I can 110% promise that you will get dividends on that investment.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of open up the whole like God trying to talk to you and perspective and dealing with some of that stuff, because dealing with drugs and alcohol and depression and suicide was not just a high school thing for me. I mean, it's been up and down throughout my entire life. Right. And I just had a conversation with a friend the other day that even with all the positive stuff that's going on right now, there's still days where I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why am I here? I'm a nurse. Like, I have a good career. Why am I risking it on something like this? Right. But we'll get to why.
Yeah.
So going through those different things, you have two options, right? And we've said that perspective is everything.
Right.
And that faith allows you to have perspective. So looking back, I remember right before Kathy, actually, this is a good quote from her describing some stuff. She says, faith is my relationship, spirituality, Catholicism is my practice. That's a good way to look at it, for sure. And then she also says that he does talk to us. Sometimes we just don't listen. That's also very true.
Yeah. I think he talks to us all the time. We just don't always listen.
Yeah.
So I would push the envelope on that a little bit.
Yeah. That's that inner voice that my mom like just beat the crap out of us to listen to is that. But so senior year of college comes around, right? And at this point, it was Divine Mercy Sunday. And I decided the Tower Award banquet was that night, right? So Divine Mercy Sunday was at 3:00 in the afternoon. And then a banquet for the Tower Award was at 7 p.m. that night. And for those of you that are listening that don't know what the Tower Award is, it's an award given by my alumnus, Walsh University. And it's basically the valedictorial equivalent, but for leadership, right? And whoever gets this award gets to give the commencement address at graduation. And it's like, starts out in a massive pool, gets narrowed down to 5 people. 5 people go to a banquet, yada, yada, somebody wins. But Divine Mercy Sunday that day, I decided that I was going to go to mass, and then I went to confession, and I spent probably half an hour in the confessional. I mean, it's the first time in my life I really tried to do a deep dive, and like I went all the way back as early as I could remember and talked about things that were just like messed up things that I had done over the entire my entire high school years, like all the way up to that point in my life. Just things that I had never really talked about, things I was ashamed to admit, all of this stuff, and just laid it all out on the table. I was like, if I'm going to go into this, I'm going to go into this with a pure soul and try to really focus on that. Because during that, immediately after that, in the Catholic faith, we have this thing called penance, right? And so I go up and I'm praying. I think it was a decade of the rosary or something like that. And so I'm praying afterwards, and I remember asking God, I'm like, God, since I was like 5 years old, I have felt like I wanted to be in the military. I've felt like I was called to be in the medical field. I felt like I had a path. Like you had given me a path, you had given me a mission, and I knew what it was, and I was pursuing it to the best of my ability. Right now, you're really shaking stuff up because now I have no idea where I'm going. It's my senior year of college. I'm about to enter the workforce. You've put this on my plate, which at the time was still JJD. It wasn't even Apex at the time. I need a sign. I very rarely ask for this, but I remember hearing all the time as a kid that if you don't ask, you won't receive. So I'm like, I need something because I have no idea what's going on right now. I don't even feel like I deserve to be in these top 5. So if you want me to take this path, then I need a sign. And then that night I won. And that's why, like, I cried. There's videos of me bawling my eyes out at the podium trying to give a speech holding this plaque, right? And I'm just like, for me, it was the first time I had ever felt in my entire life that I had come in first place. I had always felt my entire life that I was a second place, third place. Like I was good, but I wasn't quite good enough. And that was like the first time that I had ever really felt like, okay, like I accomplished something that impacted a bunch of other people. And I took that as my sign and was like, okay, this means that I need to look back on all the other stuff and I need to start talking about it. Because if he's giving me this, he's not giving me this as a high five. He's giving me this as a platform. It's so I started looking at that as a platform, and then all of this grew out of it. But that day was that talking to God or listening to God talk to me.
Mhm.
And ever since that day, my life has been an absolute roller coaster. Because that day I made a decision that I was eventually going to have to give up the military, which is still messing with me a little bit internally, but I decided to start following that path. Right. And without the faith or without the other conversations, and we've had multiple ones since then, being able to look back and say, this is why I went through and or survived the things that I went through, is strictly because I now have this platform. So it's like a responsibility of mine to talk about them so that other people can relate to them.
It's all a piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Because I can remember when you were initially struggling with the drug thing. I remember you and I having a conversation about the military and how boot camp was so instrumental in kind of helping you kick a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I think, we talked about it before. I think, we kind of want to compartmentalize our life sometime, but rather than looking at it like, you got 1,000 pieces of a puzzle and you put them all together, and at the end of your life, it builds this beautiful picture.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if we embrace those things, like people will say, oh, you got a degree in education and you don't do anything with it. Well, yeah, I teach people all the time. There's a lot of things that I do with that. So it's the discipline, it's the things that you learn from the different things you do in your life that helps build that Yonko puzzle, So yeah, the military was a thing, and I know you wanted to work in the medevac unit and fly people back overseas and take care of them. But in a lot of respects, you're flying overseas.
Mm-hmm.
With the broadcast.
Yeah.
You're saving people's lives. And you never know. I remember hearing once that, you don't know that when you said hello to somebody in an elevator, that you didn't save their life. You don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that you never even interact with more than someone seeing you or hearing this.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when you put it into perspective, I think we all have this tendency to feel ourselves as small. When I think, this is God, this is God's thing, we're all gifts.
Right.
And I think the sooner that we realize that, and it, like I started talking about earlier, I used to think years ago that, to leave a legacy, you had to write a book or be somebody famous. You don't have to be somebody. You're famous because you're a child of God, period.
Yeah. And it's been whenever people say like to leave a legacy, you have to be famous or whatever else, I always bring up Grandpa's funeral, because that
oh my gosh
has always stuck in my head, that we're like, this veteran postman mechanic from a town with like 3 stoplights that, had a small family, or not small, had a good, pretty good sized family, but we're all like blue collar, right? We have a couple of college educated people in the family, but the majority of us are construction workers, mechanics, farmers. Like I always loved that about us growing up, is that there's some of the, I learned at a really early age that just because you're blue collar does not mean that you're one of the most intellectual people that you'll ever meet. Right? Like Uncle Dave is like the perfect example of that. That dude is literally probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. He doesn't talk very often, but when he does start talking,
and he never makes you feel small.
No,
never makes you feel small.
No,
you always feel important when you're talking to Uncle Dave.
Yes. And that's why Zuki loves him so much too, is like always giving him hugs and stuff. But for Grandpa's funeral, I remember like there was these set hours for calling hours and stuff like that, and people started showing up like half an hour early, and it went way beyond when it was supposed to end.
Oh
And it
yeah.
was all for a postman veteran mechanic. And so, like, before we move on to anything else, what do you remember about like that time period or that day?
Oh my gosh. I gave the eulogy at the funeral. I think you remember.
Mm-hmm.
And when I stood up at the pulpit to give that eulogy, well, number one, everybody kept making these comments. It's like, you're stealing my eulogy. The father did.
Yeah.
And I think there was it 4 or 5 masses that were all going on at the same time? Because Father Yarb had one.
Yep. I think
Monsignor from or Bishop Sabula in Africa. I mean, all these people.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, for my dad.
Yeah.
This was just like so amazing that this man, this little man, you know, had made such an impact. And I stood up there. I don't think there was a seat in the house.
No, people were standing. I remember people standing along the back walls. The entire lobby was full. Like,
yeah.
I've been to a lot of funerals at that funeral home, and I've never seen so many people packed into Cree-Bomb Sanders.
Yeah, and I mean, there were quite a few people that came that I worked with, and I remember in a panic because since Dad was a postman, I bought all those pre-stamped postcards for everybody to send in honor of Dad. And I know I didn't have enough.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up, but you know, the other thing I remember is stories. And I encourage people to share stories because that's the way, you know, the legacy continues. And I remember Uncle Richard telling me a story about how when he first bought a car, him and Dad went downtown to the movies, and they ended up walking back home to Baba and Zeto's house, and Baba had made a pie or something. And she said, "Richard, where's your car?" They had forgotten it. They forgot it at the movies because they forgot he had a car. But I mean, that's an example of, you know, it's the color of life. I mean, so you just share those kinds of things and fun things. But yeah, I actually had a dream about him the other night for the first time in 8 years.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, it was pretty wild.
I definitely can't say that I've had the only dream. I swear on everything that he talks to me when I need advice and when I'm sleeping.
Yeah,
he's still very connected. But that day is really what solidified my perspective for the long term, right? I realized that like, because that was closer, I think I was like a senior at that point. So me and him had our interaction. I hadn't quite gotten to the point where I had told you quite yet, because I think I was in college at that point. But we had that conversation, and then he passed away, and I was dealing with all of that. But I remember being in there and seeing all of those people and knowing, like, wait a second, why are all these people here? You know, and processing it. And then really realizing that, like you said, to have a legacy or to have an impact, you don't need to be famous. You don't need to have a whole lot of stuff going on. And I think that's why I really attached to John Dietz, the other guy that I've been, talking about, because he reminds me a lot of how Grandpa thinks or thought. Is you just need to, whether you're only meeting somebody in the elevator, you're talking to the gas station cashier, if you can offer somebody nothing more than a smile, a hello, a how are you doing, checking in on somebody, taking the time out of your day to go do something because you know how much it'll mean to somebody.
Yeah.
Being the person that people know based on reputation. And when you say something, you're going to follow through on it. And then if they call you at 3:00 in the morning, you'll come and drag them out of a ditch. Like, that's the kind of person that he was. And that's what I really latched onto that day.
And you know what? I've been thinking that, that those kinds of things are what helps me, for lack of a better way to put it, sharpen my faith. Is because I think God challenges us all the time. When I first started reading the Bible and got serious about Bible study, I realized it was like, God didn't come for people that really had it all together, which I'm not sure that there's anybody on earth that's got it all together.
And if they think,
but the Bible really reminds you, he really came for people like us that struggle in the whole 9 yards, and he really accepted everybody. So when I think about that, it challenges me when, my judgment wants to pop up and say, oh my gosh, look at how that person, or look at how that person, or whatever. And I'm like, Janet, that's, no, God doesn't challenge it. God is challenging me to change my thought process, to say, yeah, you can't judge because you haven't walked a mile in their moccasins.
Yep.
I don't want anybody to judge me. And my job is not to judge you, because in not judging, that's how I practice my faith.
Yeah, and I've always used a pencil to kind of explain that thought process to people, and I say, like that people's life is this long, right? And that we have, at any point we meet them at somewhere along this timeline, and at any given moment, anytime you interact with somebody, you really only know that much about them.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not even talking about the whole pencil. There's a little teeny tiny circle of graphite on the inside of there. That is how much you know, regardless of how well you think you know that person. That's about as much as you know about them, unless they've been a lifelong friend.
Yeah.
Because
well, even then, they only know what you choose to tell them. Because if I expect you to be a mind reader and know what's going on in my heart, you only know if I share it.
Yep.
And if I'm scared to share it because I think you're going to judge me, you don't really know me.
Right. And that's why I think that I was so willing to let things loose when I was at that critical point, because I knew that there was a low risk and a high reward potential, because that's how my brain works, right? I do everything is risk calculated for me.
Yeah. Well, and I have to tell you, I'm so very proud and blessed to see that like all of this is like erupting inside of you and being shared. Because I really do think that that's when people relate and understand that, because they can see the Yanko that's cool and got it all together and the whole 9 yards, but which I think is there. But what they also need to see and to understand and be able to relate is that this doesn't all come easy to you, that it's been a struggle. But don't judge me by my past, judge me by who I've become.
And that is a huge thing. And I posted this thing the other day about checking in on your friends when two like good things are happening, because eustress and de-stress are similar. And then the other part of that was I posted a video of Elon Musk, and I was like, by no means trying to compare myself to Elon Musk, because Elon Musk is like the modern day Nikola Tesla, but he has a segment in that video where he talks about not being able to shut it off. And I was like, if anything, if you can give me any type of grace and understanding when I might go off track, or I get too passionate, or I'm too forward and I get way like that, like you said, that fire erupts, and I can't, like, when it does erupt, it erupts hard, and it takes a lot of energy to try to keep it down. But I can't turn it off. I sleep with a notebook next to my bed, because there's points where I have so many ideas running through my head of how to solve problems that I have to write them down. Otherwise I can't go to sleep.
Right.
I've lost relationships because I'm so focused on this that I can't turn it off. And that's caused me to have dissonance in relationships. It's caused tension in family issues over the past. At this point, we're all on the same page, and Mizuki and Sam are all rock starly supporting each other. But that wasn't always the case, because I couldn't shut it off.
Right.
And so I've gotten way better at learning how to manage it. And this kind of leads us into that third place, because with faith and perspective, it's given me the ability to choose to be kind. And that's, I'm going to read I had this kind of pegged beforehand, but there's a poem by Rudyard Kipling that my dad gave me when I turned 18. And inside of, we've always read it ever since I was a little kid, and he's always kept me like in with poetry. But he gave it to me in a frame, and at the bottom of the frame is a picture of me, him, Grandpa, when Grandpa taught me how to fold the colors. And like, I'm dressed up in like Grandpa's old uniform, Dad's holding the other end of the flag, and it's like the day that I learned how to fold the American flag the proper way. But this is the poem. So it says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, and if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with both triumph and disaster and treat both of those impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things that you've given your life for broken and stoop to rebuild them with worn out tools, if you can make one heap of your winnings and risk it all on one turn of pitch and toss, then lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing left in you except for the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings and never lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, and if all people count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of a distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. And so I read this poem and the Desiderata, which is another one that my dad really loves. I read both of those every morning because it puts me into a headspace where in the Desiderata, there's a line that says, listen to the dull and the ignorant, for they too have their lessons to offer.
Amen.
And so I listen to that, or I read that, and I read this poem, where I'm like, okay, if I can keep my head on straight, if I don't really care about people hating me or liking me either way, and my true, like, down to the core, I'm basing my decisions off of what keeps my conscience clean and trying to have a positive impact with anybody and everybody I have an interaction with, learning from the people that I think are stupid or everyone else thinks is stupid, or and really putting that best foot forward. The biggest thing in this poem that really like punches me in the face every time I read it is the third paragraph where it says, if you can make one heap of all your winnings, risk it, lose it all, and never breathe a word about it, and then stoop down and rebuild it with tools that are all jacked up, and keep pushing regardless of when even there's nothing left in you, literally, except for the words, hold on. There's so many points, and I'm going to kind of turn it over here. There's so many points in someone's life where they reach that point where there's literally nothing left except for the echoes of some voice that's telling them to hold on.
Mhm.
And I know both of us have for sure been in that spot, and I'm going to kind of turn it over and let you take that.
Well, and in my life, that's been God. I can remember telling somebody one time that I was having a conversation with somebody about something. I don't even remember what the conversation was about, but as the conversation ensued, I realized that I was wrong and I admitted it. Mm-hmm. And I remember consciously being aware of the fact that I was still here. I was like in amaze that physically I was still here. But what made me understand.
I
think that. You're back. Okay. Yeah, but it was like it that was the moment that everything changed. Mm-hmm. Because it really was just okay. I can remember when I went through the divorce, I thought I was going to be homeless and living in a shelter with kids. I never really thought, I got a house. I'm making my own house payment. I just, I'm about to get all my bills paid off. It's just like, and so, I think sometimes our worst enemy is ourselves. Mm-hmm. And in that moment of, it's always been God. There has never been a doubt in my mind that God has always existed. Mm-hmm. But I had to come to the point where God just helped me believe that, that I'm okay. It's okay. And that, if you fall again, you just pick yourself up and start all over again, and I'm going to catch you.
Yeah. And kind of dust it off. And that's the thing, like that phrase you used, right? That I'm going to catch you. Yeah. I think that it's kind of misleading. And I just like I started writing a blog about this, specifically about that phrase. So it's cool that you brought that up. Because I think that people constantly believe if I start to fall, God's going to catch me.
Yeah.
Or like I hear that everywhere. My partner will catch me. My significant other will catch me, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, yes, I agree with it. I think that he does help you back up. But, and I'm not a parent yet, so I'm not even going to pretend that I know what that's like. But I've had conversations with my dad where sometimes the hardest thing to do as a parent is to watch your kid eat asphalt so that they learn not to go down the driveway, without a helmet on, type of thing. And that's kind of pushing it, because you should probably tell them to wear a helmet. Yeah, that we'll leave that where it's at. We'll say that that's the most rebellious thing that I've ever done. But he said all the time that sometimes that's the hardest thing. But in order for them to learn and to come back to and understand why your opinion is valuable in the first place, you have to eat crap. And I've always thought about that, is that people think, and I think that part of the thing that causes dissonance inside of young people's minds when they're thinking about faith is that they're constantly hearing God's going to catch you, God's going to catch you, God's going to catch you. I'm like, no, he's not all the time. Sometimes he lets you eat it hard.
No, and I totally
and then helps
agree
pick you back up.
And I think when I say that, what I mean more is that it's not so much that he's going to catch you, that I'm always going to love you no matter what. I have given you free will to make your own choices, and you can make whatever choices those are. And I'm going to love you no matter what, but it's your choice to make. So it's either my choice to make a relationship with him. It's my choice to be kind. It's my choice to have faith. It's my choice to have the perspective of acceptance. And accepting other people's points of view, because you know what, I might not agree with you initially, but I might learn something new and change my mind. So yeah, I agree that it's not really about catching. It's just he's always there.
Yeah.
Always.
And it's been cool, like, I mean, having to go through this whole quarantine thing, and obviously not being able to go to mass or anything like that, but we were talking about, like, we were watching Bishop Barron on YouTube for mass, and he had this homily the one day where he said, like, regardless of which direction you're walking, and he was like, we get in our own heads about this all the time. He's like, if you're walking in the right direction, he's there. If you're walking in the wrong direction, he's there. You just don't notice it, because we tend to do this with our own lives, right?
Yeah.
We're just we don't see any light, and it's because we have our own freaking hands over our eyelids.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you would just crack your fingers a little bit or take your hands off, you would see all of this beauty around you. And people get on me all the time because they're like, how are you so positive all the time or so motivated all the time? First off, I'm not like that all the time. Sometimes that's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm staring at my ceiling in the, like, a really, deep spot, because I'm like questioning a bunch of things. So I'm not always, jittery, motivated, super happy Jan, but I get to hold that personality the majority of the time because of the ability for me to be thankful for things as simple as having a roof, like you said, paying off my bills, knowing I have a truck with 260,000 miles on it that looks like it has 180 because I take care of it, but it's still running. That's good. Walsh was willing to give me a place to quarantine away from my family because I was an ICU nurse. That's something to be thankful for.
Yeah.
And if you've got nothing else, I remember talking to those 14-year-old kids that were in rehab because their mom, prostituted them to her boyfriend so that she could buy drugs. And they're in this house in rehab on a sentence, and they're just thankful to be in a house with meals and not have to worry about potentially getting sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what in the world have I ever been complaining about in my life?
Yeah.
And you start to get that perspective, whether you're traveling or you're doing outreach or you're, especially as a nurse. I know all of my nurses out there that are listening to this. I mean, you see things that you're just like, oh my God, I'm thankful for where I'm at. But you can't let that snowball into, well, it could always be worse, because that gets really annoying. But just acknowledging where you're at and being grateful for the things you have rather than feigning for the things that you wish you had is a very good place to get to, because then you wake up every day ready to just kick ass.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes you want those things because you're trying to cover up some other kind of pain, and then you got to recognize that's all kinds of other addiction stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Beth Humbert commented, and she says his favor surrounds us. If we aren't still enough, we tend to miss his messages.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
interesting. Have you experienced any type of like messages that have come through, or like any personal growth over the quarantine, being forced to spend so much time alone?
Yeah, I had a friend stop by one night. I wanted to bake some fruitcake, and I couldn't find orange slices anywhere and some other things. And she had gone out shopping because she knew I was kind of, being older, worried about leaving the house and stuff. So she had brought it over, and when the kids have brought stuff before, they leave it outside the door. They ring the doorbell. I go out and get it in the whole 9 yards. Well, when she brought it, she drove half an hour from Lancaster to bring it over, and her and her husband stood out on my, in the driveway and stuff, and we talked for about a half an hour. And I realized, I was like, I have been fearful or scared or something. And I thought, I think it's one thing to be um, conscientious about being responsible about all this, washing your hands, wearing a mask and all that, but I don't have to be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think that there's been, and it's been good. I've been reading a lot and doing those kinds of things that I realize that those are the things that bring me comfort.
Yeah. For those of you that are just tuning in, I'd like, Tammy, Amber, Tatiana, Lauren, Jessica, Sean, Randy, Eric, Kevin. Appreciate you guys stopping by. I'd like to, I was planning on kind of wrapping up there, but you said a word that brought up a whole bunch of stories, and there's one last conversation that I think is going to be powerful for people to hear.
Okay.
And I'm gonna let you open it up, and it's the comparison between me and Taylor that we've talked about.
Yeah.
And how we've, like, ever since we were little kids, we compared ourselves to each other, and we're to the point now where, he's just like a brother, like you said. But the word that always came up every time we talked about it was I had the privilege of being raised without fear.
Oh, absolutely.
And I want you to explain that from your side of the house, because I try to explain it to people, and I don't think they quite get it when I say I genuinely, hi, Malia, you can pop on, say what's up to everybody.
Hello.
So this is my baby cousin, Malia. I guess she's not a baby anymore, but you're making me feel old, girl.
She photobomb.
Yeah. So that's Malia, everybody. Say hi to Malia.
Yeah. Well, and Yako and I got into this conversation, and I've had this realization over the years. When they were little, they came to visit one time, and my neighbor came over, and she said, your niece is in my house. And I was like, what? And I was like, what? But I recognized that, and I don't know if some of it was his mom being a little naive because of coming from Europe or Slovakia or whatever it was about culture here, because it's like the kids are running around everywhere. And I live in Columbus on a main street, and I'm thinking they're going over the playground and playing. It's like, you got to watch kids because they get stolen around here, those kinds of things. But in retrospect, it's like my grandson, who's just about the same age as Yanko, a year younger, I think. It was like, the different part of the difference is Yanko was raised not to have any fear about anything. They just tried a lot of things and just kind of jumped in with 2 feet. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that Taylor was raised to be scared, but I just don't think, you look at the world different. And I can honestly say for myself, I wasn't raised that way. Mm-hmm. And I can be fearful about a lot of things, and I've started to pay attention after Yanko and I had that conversation. And I think I really can tell the difference between people who were raised in an environment of where this fear is not. I got into a conversation with a girlfriend of mine the other day, and talking about how her kids allow their kids to do all kinds of things with this COVID and stuff. And it's not like it's dangerous things, but it's like you don't, when you raise a child not to have fear, I think the world opens up to you in a different way.
Yeah.
But I also believe that you can learn not to be fearful if you weren't raised that way. It's a choice.
I agree.
Yeah.
And that's the I actually had a conversation with a girl that named Abigail Barlow. That she's, like I said, she's a singer. She's out in LA. She's big on TikTok right now, which is kind of why we linked up. But she was talking about like moving to LA at 18 and deciding that she was going to be a singer-songwriter. Her sister lived in LA, but her parents were like, yep, if this is what you want to do, we've watched you put in the work, go do it. And being supportive of it, regardless of like how fearful she was at the time. And I want to say that I couldn't see it for a long time. When you said being raised without fear and everything like that, I never really understood it. Right.
Yeah.
I was just like, that doesn't make sense. Like I'm afraid of a lot of things. Right. I'm afraid of failing. I'm afraid of not being able to find love someday because I'm too focused on my career. I'm afraid of all of these different things. Right. But the difference is that through faith and perspective, I'm able to put that into a lens that changes my fear into an opportunity. And that's the biggest thing that I think is something that people need to understand, is that it's okay to be afraid. It's not that you're like being raised without fear. It's not that, your life could punch you in the mouth as many times as you want. And as stereotypical as it sounds and as cliche as it is, Rocky had it right, that it's not about how many times you can get hit. It's about how many times you can take it and keep moving forward. Like, fear comes in when you get punched in the mouth and then you're afraid that punch is going to hurt the exact same the next time that it comes. But just like boxing, and in Marquise, if you watch this, you'll appreciate this reference. But just like in boxing, if you get punched with a right hook, you have two options. You can either learn to be on defense or you can learn to be on offense. So you either go on the offensive and start throwing jabs so that they can't throw a right hook, or you learn to move. And it's the people that just stand there and they get paralyzed by it that my heart goes out to.
Well, I think when you're raised to be fearful, kind of, you're afraid to try. I can remember not wanting to try anything because I couldn't be perfect. That's a whole nother story. But I think when you're raised to be fearless, you're not afraid to try. So
that's true.
So I think that's what the difference is, at least in my mind, is that growing up, and I can remember Mom was afraid of the water. It was like you never learned how to swim. You didn't, you went to the beach, you got your toes wet, and that was about it. Because she was like
the camera story. I always remember the camera story about the beach.
Yeah. So I mean, it's so when you're raised with fear, and it's not about blame, but because that comes from some other generation,
Right.
But when you're raised fearless, I think it's less apt to, it's not that you never have fear. Like you said, there are fears in some things, but I think you're more apt to try.
And not be
because it's like, it's no big deal. If it doesn't work, I'll try something else.
Yep. And that's what it is. And that's exactly where we've been at with Apex, is just, if one thing doesn't work, then I'm staying up for probably the next 3 days straight and trying to figure out what the next move is, because it's at this point it's a calling. Like I started to look at it as that, and I'm not going to give anything less. So for those of you that are just tuning in, this has been a conversation with my Aunt Janet Wilks down in Columbus. You'll be able to watch this after it's reposted on YouTube and Facebook in about 10 minutes after the live stream ends. We will be going live again next Tuesday at 7 p.m. for hashtag Let's Talk about Something Else with Kathy Harris and Tracy. And then next Wednesday, we will be hopefully going live with John Dietz. He was not able to go live this Wednesday because he's actively recovering from shoulder surgery. So prayers are with him. He's doing well. And hopefully we'll be back on the train next week. So those of you that did get a chance to tune in, shoot us a message. And if you enjoyed this conversation and want us to have another one like this, let me know. because I know where she lives and I can force her to get on her computer. And with
Malia's help, we could pull it off.
Right, exactly. And as long, yeah, we'll have Malia. She can be the producer.
Yeah,
we'll get her. We'll get her an Apex computer, and
Yeah.
she can run your stuff down there. I want to say thanks, right, for being willing to come on and have these types of conversation in public, because for a lot of people this is weird. And it's not necessarily something that's normal. It put like having deep conversations like this in the public eye. So definitely want to express my gratitude there. And then just for being you and for being, you know, everything that you've done for me over the last couple of years. And I know that everything that you're going to do for me moving into the future, with all of this is going to,
yeah, well, you know, you got my heart, bud, and it's just, you know, and I'm not sure that you recognize it, but you know, there's a lot of ways you make me stretch too. So, and I'm a better person because I am your aunt.
Yeah.
And we have that kind of relationship. So, and yeah, it means a lot to me.
Good.
It really does.
Good. I'm glad. So, again, everybody, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. We'll be going into the weekend. I know barbershops are opening back up tomorrow. We'll have gyms open by the end of the month, and this is finally starting to look like we're getting to the light at the end of the tunnel. Regardless of what's going on in the media and regardless of everything that's happening, I always tell people, stay rational, try to use your mind, and ask people. The final plug. Go ahead.
You know what, Yanko, and I'm going to say, you know, the other thing is I would challenge everybody out there to think, you know, I know life is different. COVID's not going away. There's no cure right now. There's no vaccine. But I think it's a huge opportunity to use your mind and your spirit and try to think of different creative ways that you can do things. You know, that we're thinking of different ways that kids can do. Life does not have to end because of COVID. I mean, it's a challenge for us, and find a blessing in it. You know, when Dad died, going back to my dad, when he first got sick, I can remember God put on my heart, Janet, find the good in every situation. So I would leave, you know, the message for everyone to say, you know, find the good in every situation, and this is one of them.
Yep, that's perfect. So with that, we'll go ahead and end. And until next time I see you guys or you listen to one of our shows, I hope that you keep chasing that apex.
Love you, bud.
Love you too.